first of all, I really recommend anybody reading this book. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. Maybe as the title suggests, I think everybody is an entrepreneur or has some DNA of that in them. But, whether you're interested in business or starting up an idea, whatever it is, the book delves into different categories of personal plus professional life. And Pete, purpose seems to be attached to your name in basically every facet. And so I kind of wanted to start by asking you what purpose means for you and how you've been able to find purpose throughout your life.
I think that purpose means hope. If I were to say, what does it mean? I think it is something that allows you to be everything you can be, and I think fundamentally to everything there is in the world. And it's kind of having the view that you can be more and there is more. So I kind of orient around that, and I think that on the counterbalance of that, it's clearly around the idea of despair. And I think that, there's a lot of despair in the world today, and I think the more you can focus on something you can be hopeful about, what you're building, what you're doing, how you're doing it is critical. But I do speak about in the book because I think the foundation of your purpose pillars really creates the foundation to achieve everything you can be because you have those foundational values in place.
Yeah, and I mean, it's to your point, it's like it's easy to sometimes find purpose, I think, when things are maybe more stable in life. But you opened the book, and I think one of the opening sentences is, I was a hopeful and scrappy kid. And you talk about your early childhood, and parts of it are tough to read about, losing both of your parents, unfortunately, when you were, I think, still in high school, and then you go through certain different events. How do you emerge out of that? Because I think that's helpful for folks to listen to you speak about that life wasn't always stable for Pete Wilkins.
I think it was really difficult. I think that, the fact that both my parents were dead, and probably in the scheme of how it occurred is my father, who was certainly my guiding light as a youth, died right before I almost died. And as the book describes, I was violently attacked. I got slammed in the head with a club, which shattered my skull, which popped an artery, which, fundamentally is not good for your brain. I think everybody could say a club to your head is not good. But I think that when you wake up after multiple surgeries and your life is completely turned upside down, being a teenager, and who you identify as is completely reversed. Because when I finally came through, a week later, I didn't even know where I was. And I think that's a really good example of where I was in life. And I think I was in that position in life for a fair amount of time. And I think at that same point, you look for people that have stabilized you. And that was clearly my father, who had just died, about 18 months earlier. All those things, there was no hope. And certainly being that young, everything you were told, for me, was bullshit. Like, do the right things, make the right choices. And, by the time I was in that position, it seemed like I did do a lot of the right things. And I can really, overcame a lot of obstacles with my mom dying when I was 10 and fundamentally getting myself back on my feet. And, given the number of circumstances, really was putting my life on track given those circumstances. But when you are there and really feeling like there's no reason to move on, and to say, what's the purpose of this? Like, to really say, what is life about? And I think I had a ton of good reasons to question it. That is a really deep, dark space. And I think that, what I say in the book is, I think you found, or, I found purpose in the moment. And that was to say, hey, you know what? Stop thinking that. Start just showing what you have right now, and take it honestly, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, week by week. And I think that's how I did it. And I think that my purpose was much different than something grandiose that, we aspire to. but it shows the power of purpose and getting your head and mind right to travel down that journey. And I think that laid the foundation of my view of the world. The book encapsulates that. And I think what I set out on a quest, I guess that's probably wrong. A quest was set out for me to really try to explain what was going on. And so, it details about my successes and failures in business, the number of entrepreneurs I deal with as a venture capitalist, how they kind of achieve success. And the book really speaks to that. And to your point, the book certainly speaks to entrepreneurs. And I think that it will help them lead companies in a way that will help them outperform what they would do without it. But it's really about looking at your overall life and how to lead a successful life. And fundamentally, your vocation, whether that's being a mom or being an entrepreneur, really could be put in the middle section of the book, regardless of what it is. Because vocation probably occupies the majority of our time, and therefore you can really determine having purpose with what you're doing becomes really critical to that. So said a lot, but hopefully that provided some of the direction of the book. And going back to your point about how did I find it, it was a pretty traumatic experience, to be honest with you. And I got a host of stories about that, but certainly happy to kind of double click on anything else you'd like to connect on.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. And that must have been so painful at very different increments of your life. And I think I saw the post yesterday on LinkedIn about the scar itself. I mean, that was a gnarly scar, man.
You should see, like, it's funny because it would be something in today's day and age. I probably would have had a ton of pictures and it'd be on Instagram. I have one picture of the whole episode, but it is a scar from the front of my temple to the back of my head that looks like Frankenstein. And you look at it, this is after the second surgery, and I look at it and I was like, wow, that looks pretty clean compared to what it was. But it is, that picture you saw was, one a little bit later in life, recently, that my hair has grown over a little bit of it for sure. But anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely a war wound. I mean, crazy. So, if you think about where this weaves into how things, I guess, evolve for you, you start talking about, purpose being looking at what you love, what you're actually good at, and how you make the world better. Right? I'm curious, I think fundamentally, folks reading that are like, okay, that makes sense, right? And I remember reading your book on the train, and I remember telling you this. But it's like I read those three facets, and I've maybe internalized them a little bit before, but as soon as I reread them, I'm like, damn, I mean, I have to actually put pen to paper and really tabulate what that actually means for me. And sometimes doing a self-audit on yourself is so much more difficult than just saying it, or even coaching someone else about what they should do versus looking inwardly is always easier, right? So how did you coach yourself to actually tabulate those three facets? Purpose, what you actually enjoy doing, the strengths that you have to do them, and then what impact they have on the world.
Well, I think that it took me nearly a decade to simplify it to those three things. And, I think that what you'll see is much of my information is repackaged to create a framework for discussion. So I don't perceive myself as being the guy that those three ideas are super revolutionary. But I will say that looking at how people who have been successful have achieved it, or how they describe it, looking at research that shows kind of how do you create the right behavior to be able to realize and manifest success, those three things really speak to the core areas you got to focus on. I think that I have certainly a view that finding your strengths is really important to fundamentally be able to manifest your purpose. And I think that knowing your strengths I believe you play to your strengths versus, continue to build all your weaknesses, and surround yourself with people that will fundamentally support you. And that's specifically around business for sure. However, you do not have to do that. I just simply say, know your strengths so you understand where you are and what you're going to have to achieve. The element of knowing what you love, I think that, in the book, I provide some exercises to help people think through what does that mean. Because love is a, powerful expression, is a passion, etc. And I think spending time and actually putting pen to paper, which, the book suggests, and the workbook that is available, on my website, purposefirst.com, allows you to do that. And then once you meld those together, and you might come from a different angle, but how does that make the world better? And I would propose to people listening, if those two things are working, you're going to make the world better in some way, unless your purpose is evil, which maybe. I mean, we're not here to talk how to become evil, but if you were to flip the script on that concept, your talents plus what you are passionate or love to do will create some value in some way. And that value being manifest in the world fundamentally changes the world for the better. And I think the more you can be in tune to that, those three elements, the more purpose that you'll be able to focus, which gives you motivation and gives you resilience when you fail, which you will do as you pursue that purpose. The thing I will say is purpose is direction. Purpose is something to find and create a strategy around. It's like a game plan. But your purpose pillars are the foundation that allows you to be your best self, which we can get into later. But to that specific point, I think that is a discovery of purpose. I think that you'll notice in my book, too, because I go through some personal health conditions this year that I talk about in the afterword of the book. I certainly wasn't planning to do that, thus the afterword. But there's an element of discovering your purpose, reclaiming your purpose, evolving your purpose. Your purpose changes over time, but your purpose pillars really create the foundation for it. So I propose that, to think about it in that way. I think that somebody having purpose when they were 20 years old and having that exact same purpose to their 80 years old is unlikely. Possible, but unlikely. But having it and going to your final point, writing it down and saying this is what my purpose is gives you direction, and that direction allows you to build. And then you can actually stress test it as you move forward. Is like, hey, maybe this isn't my purpose. But if you don't have it, it can't be assessed. And if it can't be assessed, it can't evolve intentionally. And so that's where that overall exercise, where I have this purposeful continuous improvement loop, that you can look at that fundamentally kind of helps you think about it in that way.
Yeah, I definitely resonate. And maybe just to add some points that even from personal experiences, like when you look at the first facet, right, what things you enjoy, and I think you can attest to this too, Pete, it's like, I think it's helpful to remember that it's not very binary, meaning that you're not always going to enjoy the thing you love doing. But even if you're like the CEO of a very cool startup, there are days where you might be doing billing, or you might have to fire someone. I mean, there might be things within the thing that you love that aren't always enjoyable. So that's the first part. The second thing I would say too, for the purpose, I feel like when you think about purpose, it's very intimidating, right? At first glance, because you think about purpose and it's like, passion at least has a lighter connotation, like basketball could be a passion of mine, but purpose, it's like, why was I created and what am I supposed to be doing with that gift, right? It has that kind of, breadth to it. And to your point, it does evolve, because your purpose could be as simple as providing for my family. But if that environment changed, let's say your kids grow up and now you have to recreate a new purpose for the next chapter of your life. Right. And I don't know if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning, but the whole premise of that. Yeah. So that's a beautiful book about finding purpose in a very dark, grave, hopeless situation. Right?
I mean, I think that book, and it's
Viktor Frankl.
It's a actual approach from a methodology perspective that he set forth, and I think that in and of itself is probably one of the most directional books that I read when I was seeking different views of what I presented in my book. But it is the essence of life. And I often think about when I stress test my ideas, to be in a concentration camp, which I could never have imagined, to watch your family members killed, to be abused with no understanding of how you are going to get out and when you are going to get out, and to determine, what is my purpose then. I think that it is so powerful about where purpose plays. And I think it really speaks to, and I think you look at the worst situations, but it can, you apply this at the best situations, it brings out,
of course,
humanity and life's meaning in its essence. And so I would encourage everybody who is listening to this to read that, because philosophically it just speaks to how I think purpose is a superpower. And you can find it, the story of Viktor Frankl is that, he was a psychologist beforehand, so he had these theories. Then he went through this horrific experience in the concentration camps and how he was able to survive, but how he basically tested this fundamental concept through that experience, and then went on to create an overall methodology around life. And so I think that it is powerful stuff, and I think that you can apply it to a lot of great ideas. I think that I'll pause, George, because I know that there's other things to add, but I think that is a great book to highlight. I reference it in my book as well. And I think that it speaks to when you need to have meaning. I think that on the flip side, though, is how do you supercharge, not having to go through a circumstance like that. I will say the thing that I do try to do in the book, and this is certainly in chapter 7 and beyond, is how do you take this theoretical concept of purpose, which is everybody, I think, will nod their head and say, yeah, that makes sense, right? But then, after a few beers and everybody goes home and you're thinking about it, how do you actually put it into practice? That's where chapter 7, 8, 9, I really dwell on. And I think that's, from my perspective, how do you take this idea and make it applicable every day, and in a variety of settings? And I try to do that.
Yeah, we can delve into that book endlessly, but I will just add one last thing to that. Is the beautiful thing I found is, despite the environment being so dark and really inhumane and evil and whatever you can drum up, the interesting part was seeing the double-sided coin of humanity, right? The evil and the good, almost in one sort of situation, and how someone could actually emerge from that. With that in mind, I just wanted to actually build on that, because you talk about stories, right? And stories, at least in business, even, the Andreessen Horowitz talk about your strategy is your story, or your story is your strategy, whichever way you look at it. It really governs everything we do in life. And I've been thinking more about this more recently, in the sense that even when you talk about purpose, it's what kind of story can you tell yourself to get motivated about something that's larger than yourself when you aren't in the situation of a hypothetical Viktor Frankl? And one of the things I was going to ask you is what if someone's hearing this, Pete, and let's say, has more of an average job, as an example. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation. I just mean it's not necessarily you're not going to Mars or something that someone would think of, well, that's easy to attach purpose to. Maybe a doctor is another example. How does one in that predicament, use your sort of purpose first equation, which is looking at decision, the action, the ability, the circumstance, to storytell a narrative and get motivated to do something beyond what your immediate task is?
Sure. I think that we're all kind of in that same camp. I think that,
right.
So I think there's few people that, regardless of where they are, they might be closer to what the story of curing cancer is their primary mission. But I think the majority of us, including me, need to think that. And I think there's a process, and I think that first you have to have a north, and that is just simply creating a purpose vision, writing it out, writing it down. That's your narrative. I think that it has to be supported with, your 4 purpose pillars, which I suggest are honor, love, wellness, and goodness, that are pretty encompassing, so you can read and get a sense of that. And clearly they don't have to be just those 4, but I think many things fit into that, so I try to make that simple. But you write it down. Here's my vision. Here's my purpose vision. And then you create a plan. And that plan could be something that is broken down, as I suggest, into longer term, near term, and micro term to be able to execute against that. And then you're in a position where that purpose first equation really creates a formula for how you're operating on a routine basis. And so what I say in that is, first you have to know what your desired outcome is. And so many times you're going to be in a position in life, from a business, is my desired outcome and the decision I'm making right now going to be achieved, how I'm going to act. So there's a decision in that perspective. That could be with your relationships, that can be with formula of love. But the equation, what it does is that it is, without a doubt, everything you do right now is based on a decision. That decision may be conscious, it may be subconscious, but you have control over that decision regardless of the circumstances you are in. And so by making that, sometimes the tough decisions is going to be influenced exponentially by your purpose. And so I spell that out. But once you see how you perform by making that decision, and the word performance can be used as how you behave, how you act, all of those things, but your decision to perform is going to yield a result against your goal. And what I suggest is spending time to reflect, how are you pursuing or how are you performing against your goal? And what I will show you is that your decision to act, which is to do something, is critical. But your ability and your circumstances become critical factors that you need to evaluate, that are you putting yourself in the best position to achieve your goal. And so in that, what I suggest is, do you have the ability to do what you're trying to perform against? And there's a variety of different things. It could be intellectual, it can be physical. There's a host of just pure abilities or competencies that help you evaluate that situation. However, there are 9,000 books about that, self-help, which I'm completely supportive of reevaluating that. Mm-hmm. The thing that I think is a little bit different, that I devote a whole chapter, is your circumstances. And your circumstances will really kind of provide a framework for the idea of luck, because people say, well, how'd you do that? Well, I was lucky or I was unlucky. And I think it's formulated from uncontrollable or controllable activities that are circumstances. And so I think that recognizing that, your ability to repeat good decisions because you know what your circumstances are, become important. But other circumstances are your age, your ethnicity, your income, your capital access. All of those will evaluate geographical location. All of those will influence your ability to perform. And so what this does, and this is a deep topic, like the whole book could be on chapter 7 alone, because I think what it does is it fundamentally creates a decision-making evaluation to help you perform on a regular basis. And so each of those variables, if you reflect on how you perform, then you can adjust to put yourself in a better position to reach your goals. So I'm going to pause because I have another section that I want to talk to that builds to this because I think it's really important. But since you asked me a question about that, and I went through a monologue of how you get there, let me pause and see if you want to probe on any of those components that I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like Chapter 7, honestly, was the most substantial for me personally, because it also got me thinking a lot about that framework, you know, and I feel like if you're like-minded, where you need a framework to figure out how to apply it to, you know, or prescribe it to your life, I think that's where it was the most substantial for me personally. So if I'm to recap, you know, from purpose drives decision, the decision to actually act or execute, you need the ability to perform, and you also have to be in a circumstance in which you are able to perform to then achieve your goals. When we talk about, because we kind of talked about circumstance, I think purpose is central. And I did want to ask one thing as part of this equation. You studied and mapped what worked, what didn't with startups. You've compared hundreds of founders, both for this book, but even through your line of work at Hyde Park Angels and beyond. You've definitely seen a lot of successful, unsuccessful candidates. And you talk about how purpose was one of the discoveries as a pattern across different founders. I'm curious, so that maybe purpose was like the central positive theme. What was the central negative theme in terms of when you came across unsuccessful founders or startups?
I think that reviewing it through that lens is people that cannot lead. So if you're talking purely founders, I think that there is an element of leadership which is based on your vision and having a vision of where you need to go, developing a strategy, and being able to lead people to achieve that vision through that strategy. And I believe that people are inspired about much more than just making money. That is a byproduct of what you're doing. And I think leadership many times is compromised by not having a true north, both from a value-based leadership perspective. And therefore, it is compromised in the ability to actually achieve. But what I think that is a very macro statement, because that people don't need to listen to me to actually believe that. I think that that's pretty self-apparent. But I think if you're that leader and you're leading, that's what the book's about. And I think it's more about than just leading a business, but it's leading your life. What I will say that I talk a lot about is, like, the business evolves. Doesn't mean that you as a leader are going to have the skills to be the leader through that entire journey. And that isn't bad. But there is and this goes back to the formula, is like your abilities to be a startup leader versus a Fortune 500 leader are much, much different. Doesn't mean you're bad because you can't do it. Just like Michael Jordan was a great basketball player, and I think we would all agree that, and he was a pretty shitty baseball player. And, you know, he is still an incredible athlete. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or, you know, world class. It just means that your skill set isn't approached that. That's an example of how a person evaluating their abilities can recognize whether or not performing how they need to be performing. And the more they are aware of that, the more that they can adjust and achieve success and from a business perspective and a personal perspective. The other thing that I speak to is I think that people's circumstances change, and they're not even considering what is changing in the environment, and they do not adjust their leadership style or their business to be able to navigate the obstacles or be able to fundamentally get into a position where the wind is at their back. I think that it is not a macro statement. I think it's a statement in the performance equation that fundamentally shows these are all variables you have to consider when you're evaluating your performance on what you're asking me, like what are they doing well and what are they doing that is not as effective. But I think that it starts to make sense to a lot of people. And I think that what I truly try to lay out, and even on reflection, this is another area that you could really dig deep, because the idea of performance, which I believe is based on your decisions. You're making decisions all the time. You're therefore behaving, and therefore your overall product of that behavior is a result. And that result, if you have a goal, is you're going to either be successful or failure if you compare yourself to your goal. And what I propose to those that are listening is that getting comfortable with failure is really important if you want to maximize your success. And so when you look at a very simple, graphic that I have in the book, it shows your performance divided by your goal will equal the result. That result have a spectrum between success and failure. And if you are afraid of failure, you are never going to reach for and maximize and push yourself to success. And I think that the performance equation helps you understand your performance against that success or failure. What I think is really critical to understand is that is a personal, internal question to yourself is, are you looking at it that way? And once you do, because failure sucks.
Right.
Failure, just break you down, put you on your knees. If you've ever been a founder and your business has failed, which has happened to me, that is emotionally crippling. I can't even describe how just overwhelming it just sucks. But my view is that your purpose pillars give you the foundation to say that was just a failure and I am going to get up and go again. And I think that what this entire book is about is, it's not like I got to be always successful. I think it's I always got to try. And if I try to create a difference and perform at my best, and I'm constantly evaluating it, my purpose pillars give me the foundation of the core things that are important to me, my honor, love, wellness, and goodness, to be able to get up and go again. And I propose that if you have that mindset, then you're going to be striving to do bigger things. And if you're evaluating how you're performing, you're going to adjust and you're going to achieve success. And there's going to be a pattern of wins that you'll be able to replicate more wins. But you got to always evolve. And it's not like, here's the one thing, take this pill and you're going to be great. And it gets complicated. But I do feel that how it's presented creates a different framework to take the weight off of failure and fundamentally try to improve in that way. Does that take a lot of the book, hopefully, and summarizes some of it for you, George, which I know that you kind of pressing on, but does that resonate with you?
No, it's great. Yeah, I did want to touch on something actually that you kind of bring up previously and a little bit now. You talk about just being observant. To your point, it's not necessarily about knowing all the macroeconomic factors, but just being observant about what's happening in your environment, what's changing. I think all of us felt to some degree how much more, how much more in tune we have to be with our environments, especially coming out of COVID, and with ourselves, of course. One thing I wanted to ask you, Pete, is I think from 1994 to 1999, I believe you were a regional sales specialist for Kodak. So I wanted to see if you can kind of touch on that experience, because obviously it's a classical example now of potentially what happens when you're not as observant to the environment or the changing landscape. And then after that, you join a tech startup in the sort of dot-com boom or bust. So just wanted to see what that experience was like, and if that left sort of an imprint on why you think that's so important to constantly evolve.
Wow. I love the Kodak reference.
I have to go there, man. I saw you LinkedIn.
Like, that was like, I will say, as a leader in business, that was an important part of my career, because that was early on in my career for sure.
Right.
The question you're asking, let me answer the question you're asking about being present. And I think that that's probably a really good way to make me look at it differently, because I will tell you how I was then versus how I am now, which is much different. I'm much more present. Although earlier in the show, I was talking about this situation after being clubbed in the head that made me just, I think, a different level of awareness, because you're questioning everything all the time. And I think that's always been infused in me. So what I've learned is, though, I can channel how to get the noise out of my head and be present, which, you can do that through a variety of different ways. But knowing that you're making a decision is really difficult, and it takes exercise. And I think meditation helps you achieve that. So I think that, in the book, I think that knowing you're making a decision in and of itself and looking at the outcomes of that decision in that moment are critical. For big decisions like you're asking me about, Kodak was a great experience to me. So switching gears, going to your primary question, and I will tell you that was something that I saw an evolution in the market. And, even Kodak, everybody thinks of, or people that probably think of cameras, but I was in the glorious world of selling copiers. And I sold a ton of copiers, and I sold, I was among, the top 5% of Kodak sales in Northwest Indiana. Specifically, which got me there is I sold a massive deal to Gary, Indiana schools. So this is such a classic story as far as how there is a business need and creating a solution and all of those elements. That being said, that was at a time where the idea of connecting all your computers in your business was starting to actually bubble up. And it's, the idea to actually, as opposed to printing one off at this tiny printer and then taking it to the copier, there was an evolution to actually networking all of your computers and then being able to print to a massive printer. And so there's this whole optics thing that was kind of evolving. And I was like, this is going to be something, this whole idea of connecting computers. And so what was interesting about Kodak is through my sales experience, I got management experience, and I got kind of a framework of what I thought would be the next level, which was the internet, which is crazy. When I tell people, yeah, I was thinking this internet thing would be good. But that fundamentally, Kodak was able to provide some incredible business skills that I took a risk, and going from, at that time, Kodak was a Fortune 100 company. And I was like, you know what, the opportunity to look at what I see in businesses and how they're changing, the internet will transform. And I want to make a risky decision. And it was, I can remember the whole dynamics around it, to go to my first startup. And my first startup actually that was in the internet was, or kind of internet mold, didn't work out that well. But another opportunity emerged within 6 months. And that company was a lot of what I believed was the idea that you can move this data to the edges to make it work better than on these 56K modems, and the idea that video would be able to be distributed in a more effective way through the internet. So I was right on all those. But this company, but it's crazy because this is when back at the time, people were saying, "Oh, it'll never work. Nobody's ever going to watch stuff on your computer." And those decisions certainly mapped my way to where I am right now. And I was a part of my first company that was eventually bought by Akamai. And at the time, it was top 5 deals that were being transacted. from an M&A perspective. It was a couple $1 billion that it was sold for. So that was exciting stuff, for sure. And it all led to, I would say, being aware of the circumstances, of the evolution of the market, putting myself in a position where my skills could be used, and accepting the potential risk of what I perceived as something that I was more than comfortable with to make that leap. And that was a very thoughtful process, just like that I kind of spoke to. And there was just I probably would have done some things differently, but I would often, that goes back to the idea of being aware of your circumstances. Even before I was writing books about it, that was clearly a mechanism that I saw to work well for me.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I'm trying to visualize, how it was like, because even recently I was talking to my fiance about this, and I'm like, the reason why, let's say I work in a corp and I'm considered the younger, more tech adapt individual. I think sometimes on the younger side, you might feel like you hold the power, right? Like, oh, well, I use technology so seamlessly, and you might be dealing with generations in the baby boomer segment. But I was telling my fiance, one day, let's say in 2050, 2060, 2070, that might be us, where we can still be, leveraging this technology, but it won't be as seamless as someone, let's say, who's 15, 16 years old right now, using TikTok and just doing all these video reels and whatever. So it's easy to judge on the surface, but I'm sure when you were there for the 5 years in Kodak, it's tough to also see all this change happening and know what's actually going to work and what's not. All of these ideas seem crazy, man. Can you imagine even the Uber example of jumping in a stranger's car? That used to be called hitchhiking, but now you just pay a fee for it. So,
So that is, I speak to this, and I think that's a great point if you're looking for career perspective. Everything changes. It's going to keep on changing. Mm-hmm. That's what business is doing. That's how humans evolve. Change is constant. And going back to I think that we're on a verge, going back to my point there is, I have a focus. I want to be successful in my career, but the other elements of focus plus awareness. So awareness, I have to be aware of how my goals may be better suited by going down a different path than just this singular strategy of staying with this one industry in a certain way. And then looking at it, what's my mindset? And not my mindset, can I do it, but more about, do I have a cognitive bias that's in favor or against how I'm viewing this? Stepping back and and getting into the awareness of that helps you be really perspective in the moment decisions, but long-term decisions. I think that the framework that we know right now with artificial intelligence and all the data that's being collected, and you look at how that is actually playing out in a variety of different ways in the whole metaverse, and you look at deep fakes, and you look at things that are fundamentally changing. That is
scary shit, Pete.
Pardon me?
I'm telling you, I'm saying scary shit.
It is,
Pete.
but don't scary shit. But it's here. It's right here, right now, now. We just aren't living it because it's not emerged as being our new reality. That. I feel confident. So that is a completely different spectrum that we know right now. I don't know necessarily how to monetize it. I guess in my business right now, I'm trying to figure that out. But, fundamentally, that is your point. And I go back to where I was at that moment in time. You had to have a big belief. And clearly, my risk tolerance was much greater then than it probably is now. But that allows you to capture opportunities to put yourself in a position for growth, personally and professionally. So that is a wonderful. If you guys want to know about copiers, duplex, Sandplex, I got so many. That was a good time though. We had a lot of fun.
Pete is your guy.
Exactly.
Pete is your guy. Well, it's always the the tale of the time too. And at that time, to your point, it was a Fortune 100 company. I'm sure it provided so much infrastructure for where your career eventually built up on top of. I did want to end with this, I guess, somewhat of a game, but just kind of a question. But if you were, let's say, because you talk about the performance athlete relative to how a founder is with a startup as an example, and you use sports as a big analogy, and it's a big focus as to comparing, the startup world to the athletic world. And there are a lot of comparisons, certainly. And I like this one thing that you talk about, which is the startup workout routine. And within that, you talk about, meditation, sleep, working out, a bunch of other things that you recommend that you've done personally, but also that you've seen work for others. If you were a coach, and let's say I'm a founder of a 20-person startup, and I come to you and I'm like, Coach, we need to level up. All right. Let's use the sports analogy. It's kind of like what's happening in the NBA. You're seeing the rise of super teams, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden in one team, LeBron, Russ, Carmelo, Anthony Davis, all in one team. So other teams have to level up. So I come to you and I say, Coach Wilkins, give me that startup workout routine, man. How do I level up right now in both the professional but also the personal side of things?
So you used a lot of different examples, but what I'll focus on is if you believe that you as a individual, you are made up of the sum of your decisions, then you want to put yourself in the best position to make decisions. And I think that the startup athlete section really speaks to that. I think there's an element of training that has been borne out for any type of performer, specifically around elite athletes, because a nuanced improvement will have enormous result. So they focus on the details. But I would say you need to be very aware of your mental, physical, and emotional health. If you are not focusing on those and make those a priority, your ability to make decisions in life, personally, professionally, is compromised. And we could spend a show on this. I think that if I broke it down into one thing that everybody should do is they should prioritize sleep, because fundamentally that will allow them to manage many other things more effectively. However, the elements built around that is you need to have the right fans. And so I would really encourage you to be very thoughtful about who you surround yourself and how they think and how they think about you. Because toxic relationships that chip away at your foundation, which are present and people tolerate, should be certainly mitigated or eliminated. And probably more important is getting yourself around people that support you and push you and allow you to be that great startup athlete. And so the other thing that I would tell you is, just like I was talking to Michael Jordan earlier in the show, is find out which is the sport for you, and get on that playing field. So you're on the right playing field, surrounded by the right fans, going through the right training routine, you're going to perform at an optimal level. So that is my quick, as a coach, I would say those three things. Beauty.
Well, my sport in high school, the only sport I could actually make, because I was a bit chubbier, Pete, I want to be honest.
You're very handsome. If those that are just listening.
Thank you, man.
Very chiseled, aesthetically balanced, perfect. I love it.
It's taken a lot of time in the lab to make this happen. But I was on the Frisbee team.
Oh, I like it. Like ultimate Frisbee?
There was no contact. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? It was,
right.
It was cool of a sport, but not good popularity currency in high school. It actually gave me negative currency. So,
wow.
You probably got to do what you got to do, man.
I love it.
It's all good. Well, thanks a lot, Pete. I appreciate you. Thanks for being here. Congrats again on the book, Purpose First Entrepreneur. Again, I recommend everyone to really check it out. I wouldn't say this if I didn't think it was a great book. You're a massive supporter of the Chicago startup ecosystem, Midwest at large, and you've been a great friend being here as a newcomer to the city. So thank you, my friend.
George, it's my pleasure. You are a delight to engage with. You're creating a lot of value as well in the ecosystem, and I think we all do our part, so I appreciate that. And, as we wind it down, I would want to just make sure people walk away with this, is that my book is set out to create a framework to think about that you can have something that is very practical day to day. And it's not to be perfect. I'm the biggest person that says that I am imperfect, and I'm 100% okay with that. It's just a matter of this constant evolution in a purposeful fashion that will create a lot of value, I think, for you. So that's what I really want to share. I will say, I made it so anybody can access it. You can download the workbook for free off of purposefirst.com. The book is, basically less than a cup of coffee, Kindle version on Amazon. So I encourage, if this intrigues you, there shouldn't be an obstacle from a price perspective. And what I hope people get is a discussion around these topics, because I think they can be really powerful. And the feedback I'm getting, that's what people believe they are. So, George, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. I'm super jazzed, and I love Canada. Love it, love it, love it. Greatest people in the world live in Canada. So thanks for having me and reaching up north. I appreciate the opportunity.